So I started feeling like I had a cold. I took a test today, and I'm testing positive for COVID. I think this is a rebound because I had COVID a couple months ago, and the same thing happened last time I got COVID a year ago. I had it, I took Paxlovid and got over it, and then about 2 months later, it came back briefly. So I imagine it will go away, but I'm not going to teach any face-to-face classes until I'm testing negative again. So, yep, I've had it 3 times. All right, so we're up here at a 4B, Information Security Program, Development and Management. And so there's not much left of this course. This is true of the fall semesters. By the time you hit midterms, there's really not much left because of Thanksgiving and Christmas, I suppose. So here's just going to be 3 more chapters we cover. Next week is the presentations, and then there's a guest lecture on 11/29, and there's no new material on the last week. I'll just help people catch up. So is it only for me you are not audible? No, I think other people can hear me. Can other people hear me? The same. You guys can't hear me? You can hear me. DJ can hear me. These other people say they can't hear me. That's disturbing. I have a bar here that shows my sound is being picked up here. A bunch of you can't hear me. Wow. Well, there is an adjustment in here, in this thing. If you hover over this thing, there are controls that appear down here. So you can unmute it, and I think you can adjust the volume too. So take a look in the Twitch. See if you can turn it up. That's weird that people can't hear me. Some students can hear me and others can't. I don't know what in the world would cause that. If anybody has any ideas, put them in the chat. If the screen image keeps shuddering, what you have to do is adjust the resolution to be fixed. You point to Twitch, go to this settings thing, and set the quality to 1080p instead of automatic, and that will stop the screen image from getting blurry. Now my face moves like a very bad animation with 1 frame per second, and there doesn't seem to be any way to fix that. I don't know what causes that, but I'm not that important. The main thing is the screen. What time does he zoom? At 7:30. Frosty guy. All right. Anyway, let me find the slides. Let's talk about this stuff. And if anybody has any idea why some people can't hear me, let me know. I've never had that problem before, and I don't know what to do to fix it. All right, so we're down to here. We're going to talk about risk management programs, risk treatments, and audits. And there's other parts of this for later lectures we'll get to. So risk management. The purpose of this is to identify the risks and enact changes to bring them down to an acceptable level. And so you're going to align all this with your business objectives. You're going to define the risk appetite of your company. Banks, for example, are famously very risk averse. They really will take very little risks. They won't want to use any new cutting edge technology or anything new. They just want to use something that is reliable. Startups, of course, accept much more risk. They just want to get buzz. They just want to get the product out fast and things like that. They usually don't really care if there are problems. Good, I'm glad trying the video quality helps. Good, okay. So there's 4 ways to handle a risk. You can accept it, which means you just do nothing and let it happen. You can mitigate it, which means you put in some kind of control to lower the risk, like a firewall or something. You can transfer it to somebody else by outsourcing that business process or purchasing insurance. Or you can avoid the risk by changing your business so you no longer do the risky thing. Avoidance is the most extreme response, where you actually stop doing parts of your business because you're so afraid of the risk. All right, so your risk management program, you define your program, you figure out the objectives of it, the scope, which is the part of the company that's going to be covered, the authority of the people providing enough authority to allocate resources to it, roles and responsibilities of people and other resources like staff, and then you define policies, processes, procedures, and records. This is what you're doing, and so you have a life cycle. You identify your assets, you analyze the risks, and then you implement risk treatments, and then you just go around and around because you keep having new assets and you keep having new threats and therefore new treatments available, so it never stops. You're just continuously improving going around this cycle. So the process, ISACA has a framework called Risk-IT, which is a risk management framework, and you see it, risk governance is the management above to make sure it's being done right. And then you have risk evaluation and risk response. And so and the first thing you have to do is find your assets. Many companies do not know what their other assets are, especially their information assets. They don't know how many copies there are of the important files and where they're stored, and that's the first thing you need to do is determine what your assets are and where they are. Then you can consider the threats against them and protect them. So the simplest terms, you take the probability of a bad thing happening times the impact if it does happen, and that gives you the risk. Typically, you don't even have numbers. You just sort them into high, medium, and low. All right. So your threat analysis, a threat is a bad thing that might happen, some scary thing you think of, like storms, earthquakes, strikes, malware, hardware failures, and so on. Now, a threat alone is not a risk because it's not quantified. You haven't analyzed it yet. But this is how you start. You start by just thinking of all the bad things that might happen, like a threat. Then you do an analysis. You can divide threats up by groups. You can take geographic threats for your area, logical threats for different types of assets, like clearly your physical buildings have different threats than your computers. And you do a threat analysis for each highly valued asset. And then you may not know what kind of how likely these threats are. This is a problem, especially for like insurance companies. This is why if you try to get housing insurance in California right now, it's nearly impossible because climate change has made extreme weather and fire events so common that they clearly need to change their rates, and they don't know what to change them to because the risk has changed suddenly in the last few years to be much greater, and therefore they do not know how much to charge you for this insurance. Because the whole insurance industry relies on them accurately predicting the probability of bad things so that they can calculate how much to charge you. Cyber risks are extremely hard to predict. It's very hard to predict whether you'll get hacked, and it's very hard to predict how much it will cost you if you do get hacked. It varies widely. So cyber insurance costs are kind of random. So here's vulnerabilities you might have. Missing antivirus, out-of-date software, missing patches, weak passwords, unnecessary services, misconfigurations, not monitoring your network, or making other mistakes, not protecting your physical security by letting people follow other people through doors. All these are vulnerabilities. So you can determine how serious they are. In the cyber vulnerabilities, they rate them on a scale from 0 to 10, and as you see, they come at all different levels. People, of course, mostly worry about the 9s and 10s. The 10s are the most extreme ones. Typically let you have unauthenticated remote code execution, which means somebody can connect over the internet from far away and execute code on your server. That's the kind of thing that gives you a 10. All right, so you have some probability that the threat will actually be realized, which means it will actually happen and do some harm to you, and that's generally difficult to do accurately. For old-fashioned threats like getting hit by a car or dying of a heart attack, they have centuries of data, and that's what insurance companies use to very accurately predict the chance of those things happening, so they can sell insurance based on the probability it's going to happen. But in the world of cyber, it's little more than a guess how likely these things will happen. And then the impact, as I mentioned, is also hard. This is, if it does happen, how much would it hurt us? And so you state it in business terms, like inability to process customer support calls. That's business terms. Inability to authenticate users is technical terms, and that's not usually the right language for this sort of thing, because you want to communicate to business people, and they're thinking about how to boil this down to dollars and cents and countermeasures. They don't want to hear a technical thing. They want to hear what it means for the business. So qualitative risk analysis is usually all you can do, and even if you're going to do quantitative risk analysis, you often start with qualitative, so you just rate them as high, medium, and low, or a scale from 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. So quantitative risk analysis, if you can do it, you use numbers. So you have an asset value, which is often the replacement value. If you're thinking of something physical, like if a car gets wrecked, you know how much it would cost to buy a new car. The exposure factor is how much loss you'll have from a threat. So perhaps a car accident destroys half the value of the car instead of all the value of the car, so then the exposure factor would only be 50%. Then you have, that's the single loss expectancy. If a bad thing happens, how much does it cost you? Well, it's the asset value times the exposure factor. Then you calculate how many of those are going to happen per year. That's the annualized rate of occurrence. And there you get the annualized loss expectancy, which is the single loss expectancy times the annualized rate occurrence. That'll give you the annualized loss expectancy. And that, of course, is how many dollars per year you expect to lose to this threat. And now you can say, well, it's worth buying a defense if it costs less than the amount we're losing. All right, business continuity planning is using risk analysis to plan for disasters that are so bad that they might cause your company to stop operating entirely, like earthquakes and such. So these are high-impact events that threaten the viability of the organization, and so this goes in business continuity planning and disaster recovery planning. And so there are some standards for this. There's the U.S. government NIST, and then there's the international one, both of which are guides to conducting these assessments. So let's try Kahoot. This is 4B1. All right. All right. All right, I'll wait till the end of the song. All right. All right. So if you have a low impact and a low probability, what should you do about that risk? Yeah, just accept it. It doesn't matter much. It's not worth putting any effort or money into preventing it. All right? All right. A bad thing that might happen without any measure of its significance. What's that? That's not right. Gotta make a note, fix that. All right, that is a threat. A threat is a bad thing that might happen. A vulnerability is a weakness that might cause a threat to hurt you, but a threat is just a bad thing that might happen. All right. A classic mistake is your CEO reads an article on the plane and it says people are attacking you, and then he wants to buy something right there. That's where you take a threat and immediately go to a countermeasure without doing risk analysis first. That's a mistake. The bad thing might happen, but you have to do analysis to decide, well, how much does this really matter to us, and how much does the countermeasure cost? That's the kind of careful consideration you do before jumping right to mitigation. All right. All right. So what process estimates the effect of an incident on the organization? That's impact analysis. If that bad thing happens, how much would it hurt us? All right. All right, which one of these measures the amount of money that will be lost in a year? That's this one, annualized loss expectancy, which is the product of all these. The asset value times the exposure factor times the annualized rate of occurrence is what gives you the annualized loss expectancy. All right. Akram and Steph and Roland, okay. All right, let's go back to here. So, all right, and so risk treatments. The security manager is the most knowledgeable about risk, and they might want to just decide, we're going to do this can't answer Kahoota's acting up. Oh, that's weird. Huh. Well, I don't know what to do about that either. I've never seen that happen before. All right. Maybe use a different browser for the Kahoots. That might help. Anyway, that's part of why they're extra credit too. I don't have any way to make sure they're fair. Anyway, so your security manager might be tempted to just decide about risk. Well, I've decided we're not going to do this anymore because it's too risky. But that's not what you really should do, because there might be other people in the company that really don't want to accept your risk treatment, and this is how you make everybody hate you as the security manager. You make monolithic decisions that foul up people and without considering what they need. So it's better, you need to have stakeholders at a steering committee where representatives of all the business units are there, and you can say, all right, I want to do this. Is that okay for production and help desk and legal and all that? And if not, then let's talk about it and figure out what risk treatment would be appropriate. All right, and if it's undefined who makes this decision, then you don't apparently have a security management program. And of course, remember, it's not like you have to have this or you can't do business. It's a question of the maturity of your business. And if you don't have these things, then you're not a very mature business. You wouldn't have an effective security management program if you haven't got a clear process for making risk decisions. So risk mitigation is the most simple thing to understand. You don't like the risk, so you do something about it. You don't want to get viruses, so you get antivirus. You don't want to get strangers intruding on your network, so you get a firewall, that sort of thing. Typically, you precede it by a cost analysis and figure out how much it's going to cost you to put in the control, and then you figure out how much residual risk remains, because you can never lower any risk to zero. You can lower it to some extent, but you will have some residual risk left. And if the residual risk is still too high, you might have to implement more mitigation to lower it more. Risk transfer is where you move this to somebody else, make it somebody else's problem, like an insurance company or a business partner, and just be sure and examine your policy and make sure that, like if you're worried that somebody might rob your stores, so you outsource the handling of cash to a third party, then you might want to make sure you know what happens if they get robbed. Does that going to fall back on you? You got to look at your policy and consider whether you've actually managed to transfer this risk to another person or somehow you're left still holding the bag. This happened to Kaiser. Kaiser in San Francisco, the medical company, got an email from somebody in Pakistan saying, I'm going to dump your Kaiser records if you don't pay me some money. And they said, why are our records in Pakistan? It turned out they had taken their medical data and outsourced it to a company to do data entry, and that company had outsourced it to people in Pakistan without telling them, and then ripped the people in Pakistan off. And so Kaiser had outsourced the work to someone else, but they're still liable for that data. If you hand your confidential data to some third party and they do something stupid with it, you're still liable. You can outsource work, but you can't outsource responsibility. So you have to be careful and consider when you've outsourced part of your business to somebody else, what the consequences are if that other person doesn't do the right thing. And then there's risk avoidance. You can just quit doing the business. This is what Dick's Sporting Goods did a few years ago. There was another mass shooting, and Dick said, guns are just bad look for us. We're going to be blamed for these shootings. We're going to be seen as contributing it. We don't need to sell guns. We can just sell bicycles and weights and stuff instead. We're just going to quit selling guns. To hell with it. We just don't want to be in that business anymore. That business is more trouble than it's worth. That's risk avoidance. Risk acceptance, of course, is when you just decide everything is fine, but you should be considering it first. You should be doing an analysis and deciding it's really okay to ignore this risk. Companies without a good risk management team typically accept risks they shouldn't be accepting, and then they get hacked and they go out of business because they didn't really consider the risk and take appropriate countermeasures. Then, of course, you got residual risk. After you treat the risk, there's some risk left over, and you might have to mitigate it again. All right, and then, of course, compliance risk is another thought. Even if you don't have a real risk, you have to obey certain regulations like PCI and Gramm-Leach-Bliley and other ones. So you might, if you don't obey the regulations, then you have a legal risk. You might have to pay a fine, and you have to be taken to court and sued and punished in various ways. So that's another form of risk, failure to obey the rules and the laws. So you have a risk ledger that records what you've done, your identification of risk, the assets, how you scored that risk, and how you treated it, and how it worked out. You keep track of all this so you can refer to it as you may plan for future events. So you got a risk ledger. You might start with just a spreadsheet. More mature organizations get special GRC software, governance, risk, and compliance software, just to control this. All right, and then a big part of this is auditing, where you have a team that audits your things, gets records recording all these things like, do we really encrypt the sensitive data everywhere? Do we really store everything in locked cabinets that's sensitive? Do we really shred everything before it goes to the dumpster? That sort of thing. All these security things you should be doing. Do we really lock the doors? Do we really do background checks on the employees and drug tests and all this stuff? That's your auditor's job, is to generate all these documents and prove that you have actually done all these things you should be doing. So that's a security audit. Make sure they're all there. Typically requires presenting evidence. Now you can do a security review, which is less formal and rigorous. So an audit should be a systematic process performed by a competent and independent person. You usually have an internal auditor at your company if you're large, but you often have to pay for an external auditor. If you take credit card payments, PCI DSS, if you take more than, I think, 100,000 payments a year or 1 million, you will have to pay every year for an external auditor to come in to audit your company to see if you're actually doing all the things right to protect the credit card numbers. And so this, whoever it's internal or external, they'll do things like interview personnel, gather evidence, and deliver a written opinion stating, whether the results of the audit. Did you pass wherever the areas of concern, things like that. And so CISA is the certification to get that. Like I said, we've had this class on the books for a while. It's never been taught yet, but if they ever get tired of canceling classes and firing all the teachers and let us hire some more staff, we could teach this course. It doesn't look like that's going to happen anytime soon. In fact, I heard the teachers are so disgruntled they might even go on strike. So if that happens, take a look at my webpage. I'll put up a note there if I have to cancel a class because of a strike. There has not been a date announced yet, but they're talking about a strike because our management is not being kind to us. Anyway, so this class doesn't exist at City College, but it is a good certificate to get. Like this class goes to the CISM, and the CISA is also a good one to get, and being an auditor is a good job. All right. So you plan your audit, the purpose of the audit, the part of the company covered, the scope. Then you may audit the risk analysis process. You may figure, and then you have your procedures, the resources it takes, and a schedule to think about it. So your objectives, determine whether controls exist and whether they're effective. Typically, you are following some sort of compliance regulation. That's the most common reason people get an audit, because they want to meet some compliance standard like SOC 2 or PCI or HIPAA or something, and so they just want to make sure they're obeying the rules required to meet that level of security. So you can do that would be a compliance audit, the one I just described. You can also audit the operation, the finances, the information systems, or the administration. There's various other things you could be auditing. I used to work at an escrow agency, and we audited after every case. We would do a financial audit of the case, which recorded every dollar. Where did the money come from? Where did the list of payees come from? Exactly how many were there? Exactly how much money did we send out to people? Where did it go? If there's money left over, where did it go? Down to the penny. We had a nice document showing what did we do with all the money. That was a financial audit. And the FTC loved us. The Federal Trade Commission would come in every year, and they would audit you to see what you were doing. We were working for the Federal Trade Commission as a contractor, and they said they really liked us because we had it all ready to go. They'd show up, we'd say, here's the case, here's the audit, here's all the backup documents. They could just check it off, and it was done. They told me their other contractors, they would show up and there'd just be a mess, not organized, nobody knows what's going on. But we took it seriously. We were keeping track of where all the money went. Like I say, I respect finances and banking. I worked in it. It is a whole lot harder than you think to just keep track of the money and make sure it all goes to the right place. Anyway, a forensic audit is preparation for a lawsuit. So looking to determine evidence of some kind of crime or evidence to show you didn't commit that crime. And you can audit your service providers. Like I said, if you outsource some of your operations to some third party, and almost everybody does now that we have the cloud, almost everybody's putting their stuff in Amazon or Google or Microsoft Cloud, so you're trusting somebody else with your all-important data, so you might want to audit them. And you can have, the simplest thing is they will just meet some compliance standard, but you might audit them and things like that. You have a contract with them. You might have some ability to inspect what they're doing or to get some kind of documentary evidence from them to show that they're doing appropriate security things. So here's what you do, a standard for attestation engagements on a service provider's operations. This is a report you get, which would be tied to a global standard, showing the security measures that your third party is taking. You can have a pre-audit. In anticipation of audit, you might examine your stuff, and this, I think, is essentially what I just described. Our company would do an internal audit before we got audited by an external agency. We would make sure we've done it ourselves. We made sure everything is okay. This is what you do if you're a good, competent professional. You don't want to be embarrassed or harmed by being found out of compliance by an external audit. So before they show up, you clean everything up and make sure everything is right. Formal methodologies are best. You should just have a consistent process. If you're just having to make it up as you go along, it will be less reliable and less reproducible. And then you have phases, right? You define the subject of the audit, the objective, the type of the audit, the scope, and you plan it. And then you end up with a statement of work. Well, this is how you start. This defines what you're trying to accomplish, and you might need to get written approval from the client before work begins, especially, of course, if you're an external auditor, and they're going to have to charge them for this, then they have to agree that they're willing to pay for what you propose to do. And then you have your procedures. You interview people, you know what you're going to ask them, you get documentation, you use tools to collect the data and collect information from networks, logs, and such. You have methodologies, how you're going to archive the evidence and how you're going to evaluate the evidence. And then you're going to communicate. You're going to request reports from people and have meetings to get all the evidence you need. And when you're done, you're going to make a report, just like a forensic analyst, very similar thing. You're going to understand in your preparation how you're going to format the report, what you're going to put on it, how you're going to document your findings, and if you have a standard, how you're going to comply with the standard, and identify parties that will perform an internal review of your report so you know who to give it to and who's going to look at it. And then you wrap up. You deliver the report. You have a closed meeting to discuss the report, just like a pen test report. This is a confidential document. You might very well be finding things here that are sensitive. They may indicate security vulnerabilities that could hurt the company. They may indicate legal risks to the company and things like that. So it's not a public document. You shouldn't tell the whole world. You tell them privately because they may have to make, serious decisions to change things and perhaps, pay fines and stuff like that. It could be consequences for this. You have to talk to them privately, then you invoice them and archive this stuff. And your post-audit follow-up, you contact them to see how it's going. This is a very good thing to do as a professional. Say, how are you doing? Are you fixing those things? Can I do something to help you? And it helps them understand that you're seriously trying to help them. One thing that the people in this business tell me is they get pretty frustrated. Pen testers get frustrated. They say, I went to the company and pen tested them. I found these problems. Then next year I come back and they still have the same problems. They didn't fix anything, so I feel like I'm just wasting my time. And that would be an issue. If they aren't actually fixing stuff, that could be frustrating to you, but you do get paid by the hour. And it might just not be your problem. But anyway, it'd be much better if you can have a productive relationship with them and you're actually helping them improve their posture by, just like a doctor counseling you, you got to lose weight, you got to quit smoking, that kind of thing. It's understandable. They probably don't really want to obey all those instructions, but in order to have job satisfaction, it would probably help if you're having some success in improving their position. So you have evidence, observations you have yourself, written notes, correspondence, independent data from other auditors, internal documentation, and business records. All these are evidence that things are being done. So when you're considering how much to trust evidence, you can consider whether the provider is independent, not just someone in the company claiming something, whether the person that's providing evidence is qualified, whether it appears to be an objective measurement, and whether it is at the appropriate time. And if you're observing personnel, you can watch them do their actual tasks, consider their skills and security awareness, and segregation of duties is where one person does work and another person has to check it and approve it before it takes effect. This is common at the company I worked at, that escrow agency I described. No money was ever sent out without being examined by two people. One person would prepare the database to go, and another person would check it and approve it before it was used to send checks, because of course you don't want that to be wrong. All right, and so it's just a diagram of this. So you have, I'm not quite sure where you would start, but here's you identify and assess controls. Then you can have a workshop and assess the workshop to see if it has effect, is what I'm doing at one of my consulting jobs. And then you could also have a questionnaire and analyze the completed questionnaires, and these things will go back to consider more risks and stuff. I'm not going to worry about the details of that diagram. Don't quite know what the whole point of it is. Let's just try the last Kahoot, which is this one. All right. So Kawini, try a different browser. See if that helps with the Kahoot. That's what I would say. I'm just shooting in the dark, though. The internet is very complicated. You're we're all using different devices with different bandwidths and stuff, so you never quite know what experience the people at the other end are having. So whenever you have trouble, please put a comment in the chat so I know. That's my only clue if something is wrong with the audio or the video or anything else. I know Kawini is coming. I'm going to wait until she gets here. We'll see if it works any better. Ah, good. Kawini made it. Okay. I'll wait for another stanza of the song. All right. Let's give it a shot. All right. So which risk treatment abandons performing the risky activity? That's a risk avoidance. There you are. You just no longer do that activity so you don't take that risk. All right. All right, what kind of audit is in preparation for a court appearance? That's forensic. Good. All right. All right, and who should make decisions about risk treatment? Yep, it's best if you have a steering committee do it. If you have the CEO do it, you've got like Twitter under Elon Musk, where the boss just keeps making decisions, and they're arbitrary decisions, and they hurt people, and this is bad for morale. You can run a business that way, but it's not usually better to have a committee so that all the people, representatives of all the business units, have a chance to explain how your decisions are affecting them, and you don't just hamper the business of the whole part of your company by doing something that is too difficult for them. Anyway, let's see who we got here. All right, we got Sean and Steph has won twice, and Rowan has won twice. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop the recording.